want to make a correction about something I've said in this upcoming episode. When I talk about Yellowstone National Park, I mentioned that it is the only park in my rankings that has hotels inside of it. But then I realized Grand Canyon National Park literally has an entire village right on the ledge of the canyon. It has hotels, restaurants, markets, and even bars, I think. I'm not sure how I overlooked that fact, but keep that in mind when I say what I say later on. A couple more things. There was this place called Horseshoe Bend that was probably my favorite thing to see on the Grand Canyon trip that I took, and that's about 2 hours away from the park entrance. It was absolutely incredible to see, but it was this privately owned little place with a small entrance fee of its own. Still, I wouldn't go to the Grand Canyon without seeing Horseshoe Bend too. And the lakes on the Utah-Arizona border were pretty incredible as well. The main one is called Lake Powell. And finally, before I get into my final four, I was talking with a friend after I recorded this episode, and he used to work at the Grand Canyon. And he told me that the north entrance was way better of an experience without all the touristy types. I went with family and we ended up going to the south entrance. So I'm not really sure what the other experiences are like, but the north seems to be more remote from what I've heard. And that west entrance, which is closer to Las Vegas, is the part where they have that walkway with the glass bottom on it. So I suppose it's sort of 3 different experiences depending on which one you choose. Again, like I said in that first part, you may have completely different experiences with these parks than I did, depending on what your goals are, depending on what you want to get out of it, depending on if you were a hiker or if you're a touristy type yourself. Maybe you prefer the village instead of the remote areas. I don't know. So to each their own, I say. So keep that in mind as we dive into my top 4 picks. All right, let's get started.
The Great Big Intergalactic.
Hey everybody, this is part 2 of my National Park rankings. In the first episode, I ranked 9 through 5. And in this episode, I'm going to rank 4 through 1. And let's get to it. At number 4, I'm going to choose Yellowstone National Park. This is where things start to get otherworldly. I'd say that all 8 of the parks that I've visited over the last year kind of fit this description, but seriously, at Yellowstone, if you blindfolded me, made rocket ship noises for a couple of hours, and then took the blindfold off and dropped me off at Yellowstone, you might be able to convince me that I'm actually on another planet. Yellowstone is very large, and it took me multiple days to try to see everything. And even with the 3 days that I spent there, I still felt like I missed out on a lot. The entire time I was there, I just had this constant FOMO or fear of missing out, which was almost impossible to squelch. I went there on the weekend right before Memorial Day, and even in the town just outside of the park in Montana, West Yellowstone, I think it was called, there was a little thermometer there, and it read like maybe 40 degrees. And that was like in the midday. It is really cold up there in Montana, and I'd just been in southern Utah a couple of weeks before, and it was like in the high 90s down south. So it's been kind of a roller coaster of temperatures for me this year. If you like warm, go south. If you like cold, go north, I guess. Also, at one part of Yellowstone where the big lake is, it's a super high altitude, so there was still a lot of snow on the ground, even in late May. I think that it snowed every day that I was at this park, at least a little bit, no matter where I was. But at the high elevation point, there was a full-blown snowstorm, which was kind of weird to see in late May. Honestly, at this point on my rankings, you might be able to convince me that any of the top 4 parks on my list are interchangeable. All of my final 4 were absolutely mind-boggling in their own way. So at this point, the rankings kind of become a little bit trivial. The leap between 5 and 4 is pretty big in my mind. Just the sheer amount of variety at Yellowstone is probably why I would place it so much higher than the Grand Canyon at 5. Unlike any of the other parks I visited this year, there were literally hotels or lodges right in the middle of the park, right by Old Faithful, which I did not expect to see. I stayed at a hip camp because I planned it late, which the hip camp was about an hour away, but I was so super envious of the people who had reserved a room in one of those lodges. Mostly because the park is so big that you basically spend half the day driving, so the extra 2 hours to get there and back each day really just kind of piled onto the ridiculous amount of drive time that I spent in the car anyways. The 2 main reasons why I dropped this park down to number 4 is because 1, I personally prefer to be warm than cold. Like I said, it snowed all 3 days I was there. And 2, I just felt like there was more time spent driving than I prefer. Basically, I was just chasing FOMO that entire time. just like I was talking about earlier. I think that I would have enjoyed Yellowstone much more if I had stayed closer to the park, like inside the park. I can't overstate how gargantuan this park is and just how much different stuff there is to see there, like how much variety there is. There were a few different things to see at Yellowstone. Like, I didn't know that this place had its own Grand Canyon. It literally is called the Grand Canyon. And it was incredible. There were geysers, these things called paint pots where like colored mud would be bubbling from the steam and the heat coming from inside the earth. You know, there's Old Faithful. Everybody knows about Old Faithful. There's something called the Grand Prismatic Spring, which is basically just steam coming out of the boiling water out of the earth. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's just has so many different colors in the soil and the rocks. Hot springs, Yellowstone Lake. And I think that my favorite part of it all was the wildlife, were the animals. Bison, wolves, coyotes, and bears. Oh my. Bison and coyotes and bears. Oh my. I'm being silly. This is supposed to be a serious episode. It was just so wild to drive up on the North Road there in Montana that goes east and west and just see all the different species of animals that were just kind of there coexisting together. Something that nobody ever explained to me before I visited Yellowstone is that geysers kind of smell like egg farts. You know, I think it's just sulfur coming from inside the water, but it kind of got to me after a little while. Now I know. Now I know what to expect. Another downside is that there are a lot of touristy types there, and for whatever reasons, touristy types can act really annoying. And I know what you're thinking. You're a tourist too. But that's not what I'm talking about. It's not the fact that everybody's a tourist. Everybody there's a tourist. It's just that some people act annoyingly touristy. Just some people are more annoying than others, if that makes sense. And I don't really understand what it is about national parks, but from my experience of visiting these 8 different parks this year, I can tell you that they seem to attract some very, very annoying people, and I don't really get it. But it's not everybody, but it only takes a few, you know. Which brings me to number 3 on the list. Grand Tetons National Park. Everything there is just so beautiful. You can't go anywhere in this park without seeing a view that looks like something out of an Ansel Adams work of art. And this is the park where Ansel Adams actually took a lot of his famous photographs, at least 2 of them, I think. So from what I could tell, there's basically 2 main roads at Grand Teton. The unpaid part where you can just drive up and down the road for free, and you can just pull off onto the side of the road and you see all this majestic imagery from, you know, a little bit further away, but it's still close enough to be very, very cool. And then there's the part where you pay to get in. And that's where all the hikers go. There are so many trails there that it just seems really hard to choose one. If you're a hiker like I am, Grand Teton probably just seemed like the best of the 8 if you want to go hiking, which is honestly why I ranked it so high. 1, it's beautiful, and 2, it has amazing hiking. You don't really see a lot of the annoying touristy types on the hiking part of the park once you pay to get in, and, you know, at the pull-off areas, there's just a lot of people taking selfies, and one guy, this drove me insane. There was one guy who's like, "Look, Mom!" "Look, Mom, I'm at Grand Teton!" Dude, just let us enjoy being here instead of like making it all about you. In the past, I've led a bunch of hiking groups, and it's kind of interesting. The most annoying people usually aren't willing to put in a ton of physical effort into something like a difficult hike. So difficult hikes are kind of like a filter to get rid of annoyingness, if that makes sense. This park actually kind of was a good test of my theory about this dynamic, and it honestly just kind of confirmed my biases about it. The park is relatively small, especially since it's right next to Yellowstone. But, I mean, it's big enough. And I just can't tell you how majestic and breathtaking it is to be there. Number 2 on the list is Arches National Park in southern Utah. This might be blasphemy to say. Park blasphemy. The park gods might be mad at me for saying this. But I just enjoyed being at Arches so much. The main attraction is obviously the Arches, but there are so many other amazing rock structures to see there too. The main 3 arches that blew me away were Delicate Arch. That's the one, if you've ever seen a Utah license plate, that's the one that's on the license plate. It's really incredible to know that this can exist. Like, how did this happen kind of thing, you know? And there was the double arch too. And that one was, it was just super cool to have two arches of the same. It almost formed a V. But the one that really, really, really blew me away, and I kind of saw this one towards the end of my trip, and I don't know, some of the arches start to look the same after a while, and I'm like, I'm tired of seeing arches. Do I really want to go on another hike and see another one? And as I turned the corner and saw this thing, I was like, whoa, how does this exist? The bridge is so thin that it's hard to believe that it's still up there. It felt like I was just kind of transported onto another planet where the laws of gravity aren't as intense or whatever, because it's like, how is it possible for this thin rock bridge to even exist without falling? And it was humongous. I was actually watching a video, and they kind of describe it there at the park, where somebody took a video of the arch actually falling. I think it was in the 90s, but it was just a few chunks, but I mean, it would have killed a person if anybody had been down below it. So they don't let you go up there anymore. Like, they don't let you go up to it anymore. Visiting southern Utah just kind of made me think about rocks far more than I ever have in my entire life, or far more than I even ever thought I would. But it's just kind of like, that's all that's there. It's just a bunch of rocks and cactuses. But they are so incredible to look at that it's just fascinating to see them and wonder how they formed. And it just makes you think about how old the Earth is. I mean, they broadly explain how the formations were created, but it just inspires kind of like this daydreaming of how it actually happened. The thing that I would say about the Canyonlands parks, the Grand Canyons and arches, is it just makes you realize how old the world is. I mean, when you're at these parks, you actually are kind of forced to see it for yourself. And it really takes a minute to process it all. And I processed it pretty early on in my traveling here. And then some family came out to visit me just recently. And I could see them. I could watch them like try to process it too. And you just kind of know what they're thinking, because I thought it too, you know. One of the other things that kind of blew my mind about arches is the color of the rocks, which are kind of orange. And then there's the color of the dirt, which is kind of a lime green, which I've never seen lime green dirt before. And being there kind of made me feel like somebody played with the color and the tint on the TV. I don't know if you ever did that when you were a little kid, but I always used to do it just to see how weird it could make it look. But that's kind of how it felt. It's almost like somebody changed the color and the tint of the world. And now I present to you my number one pick for my favorite park on the list. Drum roll, please. Nobody here has a drum. Island in the Sky at Canyonlands. And let me gush over this one. Island in the Sky, at least for me, was what I hoped Grand Canyon would be. The colors there are more vivid. It kind of felt like I was on Mars. Like, when you think of Mars, it's like, I wonder what that looks like. Well, go to Canyonlands and you'll see it. And the vastness of it all is just so hard to comprehend. Like I talked about before, it just makes you realize how old the world is. Like, it was so big that it was just like one gigantic canyon with another gigantic canyon inside of it. Like, there was like at least two levels, and both levels were just massive. And there was just so much variety as I traveled around the park. And the good thing about this, kind of why I put Arches and Canyonlands, Island in the Sky so close together in the rankings, is because they're kind of one trip. I would say that Arches and Island in the Sky are closer to each other than Canyonlands, Island in the Sky, and Canyonlands Needles entrances. Does that make sense? So if you go to Island in the Sky, also go to Arches. Oh, one thing about Arches is there was timed entry, which was really, really confusing. Fortunately, I went there on a weekday where it's easier to get the reservations. I think it's harder on the weekends, and I think on the weekends you have to order way in advance. I don't know. Like just like with Zion, these things are in the hot desert. You don't have to wait for summertime to go there. Like, you don't have to wait for peak season. You can go when it's still a little colder out. Actually, you know what? Let me look it up. What elevation is Island in the Sky at? That's not what this is. So Island in the Sky is at 6,000 feet. So, okay, it could be a little cold up there. So forget what I just said. Still, I do all these things before peak season, before summertime. And like I said, there's just so much variety as I travel around the park compared to Grand Canyon. This park seemed like a good mix of driving and hiking, which were both equally enjoyable to do. You know, like I said, at Yellowstone, there was so much driving, I got tired of driving. But I never really felt that way at Canyonlands Island in the Sky. This place was just so vast and beautiful that my head almost exploded trying to process it all. It's hard to process. And it almost makes your head hurt almost, or at least mine. And it's just like, how do I capture this? I mean, you can take pictures, but I don't know. When I went to Arches and Canyonlands, I left thinking, oh, it's over. I don't want it to be over. Like the second, I was so tired by the end. I was like, Caesar, balance this. Don't wear yourself out so much that you hate it, but also you're probably not coming back. So don't leave too early, kind of thing. Because it was so much fun. Everything was just so beautiful and spectacular. I've never seen a visitor center with a view that amazing. And I actually almost missed it because I was inside the visitor center. I just really don't expect there to be a view at the visitor center. And I didn't go across the road at first. And I actually got in my car and started driving away. And I'm like, you know what? I should stop and turn around and check that out. And I'm so glad that I did because, whoa, again, a canyon and then another canyon. And this was kind of cool because there are roads in Canyonlands where you can only go if you have a 4x4 and a permit, I think. But as you look down from the view at the visitor center, there's basically 4x4s and they all kind of go together down below, kind of on a cliff, just going around the rim, like the middle layer of the rim. And then below that is another canyon. And it's just hard to believe how big it is. And it's hard to believe how vast and high up in the air you are compared to the stuff below you. I think my favorite part of this was the Grand Viewpoint overlook. Now, this was, I think, about a mile hike one way, if I'm not mistaken. But this was my favorite view. Again, you need a poet to describe it. It's just all the different colors of the rocks below and all the different layers and just being able to look out over everything is, it's kind of like that scene from Lion King. Holy cow. I can't believe just how absolutely beautiful this is. And I got out of the car and went on a hike, went to the edge of the island in the sky. And when I got out there, it was so quiet that I couldn't believe it. I don't think I've ever been somewhere where it was so quiet before. Every once in a while I'd hear a little chipmunk or the wind blow, but for the most part, it's a new experience for me to hear that much silence. It was so nice. But I don't know what else to say. It's just wow. Again, you need a poet to describe it. You might be able to convince me that some of my rankings are out of order here, but I 100% stand by this park being number one. Controversial, I know, but would a top 9 list of favorites be any fun with that? A little bit of controversy. I'm sure that somebody's out there listening to this, yelling at their speakers, saying something like, "You are insane for putting Canyonlands above Yellowstone," or whatever. You might be right. If you have a different opinion on any of this, feel free to write me or send me a message on Facebook or send an email to tgbiuniverse@gmail.com. Yeah, I'd love to hear your opinion if you have different opinions about this, if you think I'm insane for my picks. And if you'd like, I'll read them on maybe one of the follow-up podcasts. Let me know what you think. How would you rank things differently? That's my top 9 or 8 or whatever you want to call it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it helps. All right, guys. Later. Have a great one. Thanks for listening to the show. The Great Big Intergalactic can be heard on Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, Apple iTunes, and anywhere else that podcasts can be heard. If social media is your thing, you can follow the program on Facebook or Twitter. If you enjoy the show, upvote, share, like, and subscribe. Whenever and wherever those things can be done. If you'd like to send feedback, the easiest way to do that is to email the show at tgbiuniverse@gmail.com. TGBI as in the Great Big Intergalactic. Or you can leave a voicemail at 216-200-7940. Contributions could include written feedback, audio submissions, voicemails, or potentially even live guests. It was great having you today, and see you next time.